Tonight, our story drifts into a land of sand and silence, where date palms sway under silver moons, and stories are told not to pass the time, but to change the world. This is a tale told within a tale, woven in the hush between night and dawn. It is the story of a merchant, a demon, and three strangers who offer not weapons, but stories to save a life. So lie back, let your thoughts quiet like still water, and let this ancient tale carry you softly and slowly into dreams, in a land of wide deserts and silver skies, where palm trees swayed like slow dancers and the earth whispered secrets through the sand. There lived a merchant of simple means and noble heart. His name has long been forgotten by time, but his story has not. He was a man known across cities for his fairness, his honesty, and the way he always weighed more than he owed. When he traveled to trade spices and fabrics, gold and oils, he never cheated a buyer, nor spoke unkindly to a seller. He wore no crown, held no sword, and made his fortune not with tricks, but with trust. And so, his days were long and his nights were peaceful. One morning, just as the horizon melted from copper into gold, he loaded his donkey with bundles of cloth and jars of rare perfumes and set off through the soft dunes. He walked beside his animal rather than ride it, letting his feet sink into the warm sand, his pace slow and steady. The sky above was cloudless. The sun was high, but not cruel. He passed the remains of ancient roads worn by time, where crumbled stones whispered of forgotten caravans. Now and then, a bird flew overhead, its wings flashing silver in the light. And as he traveled, the only sound was the wind curling around him like a shawl, soft and low. By mid-afternoon, he reached a cool grove of fig trees that rose like an oasis from the earth. The shade was kind. The ground beneath was dry and firm. There was a small stream nearby, shallow and gentle, where pebbles slept beneath rippling light. The merchant smiled. It was a good place to rest. He untied the saddle from the donkey and set the animal free to graze. Then he sat beneath the largest tree, its branches wide, its fruit heavy, and opened the small bag of dates he had packed from home. They were sweet, rich and soft, tasting of honey and warm soil. As he ate, he plucked the pits from his mouth and tossed them aside, one by one, watching them land among the roots. There was no thought in the act, no malice, only habit. After all, what harm could a date pit cause? The sun drifted lower in the sky. A breeze passed. He closed his eyes for a moment, hands folded across his lap, and listened to the sound of the leaves whispering above him. And then the air changed, not cold, not hot, but heavy, the way the world feels just before a storm. He opened his eyes, and the tree he leaned against had gone still. The birds had vanished. The donkey, grazing peacefully moments ago, stood rigid, ears twitching, as if something unseen had touched the edge of its thoughts. Then, without warning, the earth trembled softly beneath his hand. A sound followed, a low, grinding growl, like stone dragging across stone. And then, a shadow, tall, unmoving. The merchant turned slowly toward the source, and standing before him was a being not of this world. Its skin was dark as desert stone, its eyes burning like coals. Horns curled back from its head, and around its waist hung chains that rattled without movement. The air around it shimmered, as if reality had forgotten how to hold shape. It was a demon, silent, ancient, and watching. The merchant, stunned but calm, bowed his head low, his voice steady. "I mean you no harm, spirit. I am a simple merchant, resting in the shade." The demon's voice, when it came, was deep and hollow like the wind inside a cavern. "You have taken my son's life, and now I will take yours." The merchant's heart stilled, but he did not run. He did not cry. Instead, He sat quietly beneath the fig tree, eyes wide but steady, and listened because something told him. This was only the beginning. The demon stood tall and unmoving, his form casting a long shadow over the fig tree. He was not made of flesh and bone as men are, but of older, stranger things. Dust from forgotten ruins, fire that once lived in the earth's heart, and silence pulled from ancient tombs. His eyes glowed dimly, not bright, just enough to make the merchant feel he was being seen entirely, down to his thoughts. The merchant, still seated beneath the tree, did not rise. He knew he could not outrun such a creature, and even if he could, running would be no answer. Instead, he folded his hands calmly in his lap. "I have taken no life," he said, voice steady. "If you believe I've wronged you, speak it. I will not deny a truth I've yet to hear. 1 year, exactly, and he is gone." The merchant swallowed slowly. The grove, once soft and shaded, felt now like a place held between two worlds. "I am sorry," he said. "Truly, I did not see, I did not know." "Yet a life was taken," said the demon. "And the ancient laws are clear. Life calls for life." The merchant bowed his head. "Then I ask only one thing before my time is ended. Let me return home, just once. Let me settle my affairs. Let me embrace my wife and children. Give me 1 year. I swear by the sun and by the stones beneath us, I will come back to this place, on this very day, and give you what is owed." The demon studied him. Silence passed between them, long, then longer. A single fig dropped from the tree and rolled gently across the earth. Finally, the demon spoke. "You would return to your death? Without chains, without guards, without magic binding you?" "I would," said the merchant. "Why?" "Because I gave my word," he said, "and I have never broken it." The demon's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. "You are either a fool," the demon said slowly, "or something rarer still." He raised one hand. The chains at his waist rattled, but did not rise. "Very well. You have 1 year. On this day at this grove, when the sun reaches its highest point, you will return, and I will take your life then. If I do not return, I will find you," said the demon. "No desert will hide you. No temple will shield you. You will be mine." The merchant stood, brushing the dust from his robe. "I understand." And with that, the demon vanished. Not with thunder, not with fire. He simply disappeared, like a breath held too long, then released into the sky. The grove fell silent again. The birds returned slowly. The stream murmured once more. The merchant stood alone in the sun-dappled shade, the wind curling gently through the leaves above him. He looked down at the ground where the pit had landed, where perhaps the unseen had passed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he gathered his things, patted the donkey's neck, and began the long walk home. But in his heart something had changed. He had known profit and loss. He had known distance and return. But now, he knew the weight of a promise given in the face of death. And he knew that his life from this day forward no longer belonged to him alone. The road home was long, though the days were gentle. The merchant walked with his donkey through valleys washed in gold, through palm groves where doves sang quietly overhead, and over sun-baked ridges that whispered of time's endless passing. But though the sky was kind and the air soft, his heart was heavy. Each step he took led him closer to all he loved, and unavoidably, further from the life he knew he could keep. When he reached his home, the gates creaked open slowly. It was a humble but handsome house, built of smooth white stone, its doors carved with patience, its garden thick with date palms and orange trees. His children ran to greet him. Their laughter filled the courtyard like warm rain after drought. His eldest son clutched his robes. His youngest daughter held out a small flower, eager for his praise. And his wife, wise, warm, and watching, stood beneath the olive tree, her eyes lit by joy. But as she stepped toward him, her smile faltered. Something in his face, something too still behind his eyes, told her what his words had not yet said, that he had returned, but only for a time. That evening, as the house quieted and the children slept, the merchant told his wife the truth. He did not dramatize, he did not weep. He spoke plainly, as one who has nothing to bargain with but honesty. He told her of the tree, the date pits, the demon, and the oath. When he finished, silence settled between them like a veil. She turned her face away. For a long time, they sat in the dim light, the lamp flickering between them, throwing their shadows long and wavering against the walls. At last she said only, "You should not go. I must. There must be a way." "There isn't." She turned back toward him. Her eyes, rimmed with quiet fire, met his. "And if you do not return? If you run and stay far away? Then the demon will come for all of us." Her mouth tightened, her hands folded in her lap, and though she did not cry, a tear fell all the same. The merchant, in the weeks that followed, set about his work. But it was not the work of trade. He wrote letters. He made sure the ledgers were clear, the debts settled, the servants paid through the next winter. He taught his sons the names of his suppliers and showed them how to judge the weight of saffron by touch alone. He knelt with his daughter in the garden and helped her plant new seeds beneath the orange tree, and in the quiet hours when none could see him, he walked through the home he had built with his hands and heart, touching the door frames, the stone walls, the worn steps, as though memorizing them through his fingertips. He no longer feared the end, but he feared being forgotten. As the seasons passed, the sky changed its clothes. Summer turned to autumn. The trees dropped their leaves like sighs. Then winter came, not bitter, but soft. Rain washed the earth clean. Fires crackled at night. The children grew stronger. His wife braided her hair with white strands that had not been there the year before. And then, spring. The blossoms returned. Bees hummed. Light lingered longer each day, and with it, the merchant felt the time drawing near. The sun rose higher. The days marched gently toward the date he had marked in silence. The demon's voice rumbled low. The wind held still, as if listening. You sat beneath this tree. You ate your dates. You tossed the pits, careless as a child at play. And one landed on my son. It struck his chest, the demon continued, as he passed invisibly through this grove. And though your eyes did not see him, and your heart held no malice, the pit stole his breath. A pause, then quieter. It was not a sound at first. More a pressure like the deep stillness before thunder. The merchant opened his eyes and saw the shadows bend, as though the world itself were bowing. Then came the voice, low, vast, close as breath. You returned. The merchant looked up. I said I would. The figure appeared among the trees, not walking, not gliding, simply there. The same as before. Skin like cooled obsidian, eyes the color of buried embers, chains resting at his sides without weight. Few men keep such promises, said the demon. I am only a man, the merchant replied, and men have little enough to give besides their word. The demon studied him in silence. The air shimmered around them, the edges of the world softening as though dream and waking were crossing paths. Then you are ready. The merchant nodded once. If it must be so. The demon raised a hand, and the light dimmed. Leaves stopped moving. Even the stream fell silent, its voice caught between heartbeats. But before the shadow could fall, a new sound came, light footsteps on sand. A voice spoke, warm and human. Wait, the demon turned. From the edge of the grove, a traveler was approaching. A man leading a gazelle on a slender rope. His robe was pale, his face lined with years, his eyes bright with the calm of one who has wandered long and learned much. Who speaks? The demon asked. A passerby, said the man. I heard the wind tell of a promise kept, and I came to see if it was true. It is true, said the merchant. And now it ends. Perhaps, said the stranger. Perhaps not. Will you allow me to tell a story before you take this man's life? The demon's eyes narrowed. "A story?" "Yes," the traveler said, his voice steady. "If it pleases you, and if it touches your heart, grant him a third of his life. If it does not, strike as you will. What harm in one more hour beneath the shade?" The merchant sat silent, unsure whether to hope or fear. The demon tilted his head. His gaze softened slightly. "One story," he said at last, "then I will decide." The traveler bowed. "Then listen." He tethered his donkey, laid down his bundle, and sat in the shade, the same place where he had once eaten dates without a thought in the world. The sun drifted low. Shadows stretched long. He closed his eyes and whispered into the stillness, "I've kept my word." And far beyond the horizon, in that place where the seen and unseen meet, something vast began to stir. The sun rose without haste. Light crept over the dunes, spilling gold into the hollows between them, and touched the edges of the fig grove where the merchant waited. The air was cool still, touched with the faint scent of sap and dust. Somewhere nearby, a small stream whispered over stones, unchanged since the day he first sat there. He had come before the appointed hour. He always preferred to be early. He spread his cloak upon the ground and sat quietly, facing the east. His donkey grazed among the roots, unbothered by whatever would come. The world around them seemed at peace, the kind of peace that happens before sound begins, before the first chord of a song. The merchant closed his eyes and breathed deeply. A year, he thought. An entire year had passed like a dream. He had sown and reaped, watched the faces of his children in lamplight, held the hands that had held his own for half a lifetime. He had laughed again once or twice, and sometimes even forgotten the shadow that waited here. But now he was back, and the shadow would remember. He pressed a hand to the earth beside him. "I have kept my word," he whispered, "and whatever happens, let it be done cleanly." The hours stretched like silk. Birds crossed the sky. The light sharpened, then softened. He drank a little water, ate the last fig from his wife's pouch, and laid his head back against the tree trunk. The leaves above moved gently, spilling shifting patterns of shade across his face. When the sun reached its height, the air began to tremble. Her figure grew smaller behind him, until it was only a shadow beside the lamp, and then even that was gone. The road beyond the city stretched like a ribbon of dust and quiet. Birds flew low over the fields. The air smelled of earth warmed by morning. Every sound felt amplified. The soft thud of his sandals, the creak of the saddle on the donkey, the faint whisper of grain brushing his robe. With each step he felt lighter and heavier at once. Lighter, because there was no more decision to make. Heavier, because every step led closer to what he could not escape. When the sun reached its height, he stopped beside a cluster of palms where he had rested once before. He opened the pouch his wife had given him. The bread was still warm. The figs were sweet. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were part of a farewell ritual. Then he looked up at the empty sky and spoke softly, as though to the wind itself. "Let this be my offering." He poured a little water from his flask into the sand, a gesture of peace, and when the drops vanished, he felt the air grow still. Somewhere far ahead, past the next ridge, he thought he heard the faint echo of chains. The hour was near. The fig tree waited. And so, when evening came, the merchant reached the grove once more. The branches moved in the wind like quiet hands beckoning him forward. And so, on the morning of the promised day, the merchant rose before the sun. He did not wake the children. He did not weep beside their beds. He only paused at the doorway, listening to their breathing, their dreaming. Then he kissed his wife's hand, once, and turned toward the road. No horse, no gold, no guards, just a simple man, with nothing but a promise and the weight of his word. And as he walked into the dawn, the fig tree waited in the distance, and somewhere in the wind, the demon remembered. The dawn was silver and pale when the merchant reached the edge of the city. The gates were still closed, the guards half asleep at their posts, and the air carried the cool breath of morning rain. Behind him, the rooftops shimmered faintly in the first light, and from somewhere deep within the city came the sound of a rooster calling day into being. He paused a moment and looked back. Every alley, every wall, every turn of stone carried some piece of his life. The home he had built, the laughter that had filled it, the hands that had held his. He knew he could not linger. Promises waited for no man. Still, he turned down one last street, the narrow one that led to the small shrine his wife tended at dawn. She was there, kneeling beside the lamp, feeding it a thread of oil so the flame would never die. She looked up when she heard his steps, and though she had known this morning would come, her breath caught as though it were a surprise. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would." The words carried no pride, only truth. They stood facing each other in the half-light. The flame between them fluttered, sending soft gold over the walls. Outside, the sky brightened slowly, and with it came the sound of the city waking vendors lifting shutters, children calling, footsteps on cobblestones. "Will you go far?" she asked. "Only to the grove. And you will return?" He smiled, a faint line at the corners of his mouth. "I gave my word," she nodded, though the gesture was small and trembling. Then she reached beneath her cloak and drew out a pouch of figs and bread. "You should not go hungry," she said. "If he takes you, at least he will not say you came empty." He took it, his fingers brushing hers. For a moment, he thought of asking her to come with him, only to the edge of the fields, only so that he might hear her voice one last time. But he knew that would make parting heavier, not lighter. Instead, he said, "Take care of the children. Tell them that a promise is a kind of compass. Even when it points towards sorrow, one must follow it." Her eyes filled, but she kept them open. "I will tell them," she whispered. He bent, touched his forehead to hers, and for a long heartbeat neither moved. Then he turned. He walked away before his strength could falter, and she laughed each day when she fed it, believing the world would never learn what she had done. "You have told your tale with truth and with weight. The sorrow within it is old as the earth itself. For that, I will spare a third of this man's life." He turned toward the merchant. "One story bought you 1/3. 2 more may yet free you entirely." The merchant bowed his head. "My gratitude, though I do not yet deserve it." The traveler rose. "No one deserves mercy," he said gently. "That is why it is mercy." The sun drifted lower, washing the grove in amber light. The demons stepped back into the shade, and somewhere in the stillness, the sound of another traveler's footsteps began to echo faintly across the sand. The traveler's voice smoothed into rhythm, low and slow, as though he were reciting to the wind rather than to men. The gazelle curled at his feet, its eyes half closed, the small bells on its rope chiming faintly with each breath. Even the demon seemed quieter now. The red in his eyes dimmed to the color of banked coals. "In the days when I was still a boy," the traveler began, "our house was one of modest peace. My father was a merchant, careful and kind, my mother a woman of beauty and clever speech, and in our home worked a gentle maid, one who cared for me as if I were her own child." He smiled faintly. "It was she who taught me the names of herbs, the scent of frankincense from myrrh, and the songs the desert wind sings to palm leaves at night. I did not know then that her kindness would be tested so cruelly. One season, my father returned from trade later than usual. He came weary, his robes dust-stained, but his smile was still that of a man who has earned his rest. He embraced my mother, and though her lips touched his cheek, her eyes looked elsewhere. That was the first shadow I remember seeing in our home." The traveler traced a line in the sand beside him. She grew restless, impatient, and one night, while my father prayed, I heard her voice through the thin walls, a laugh that was not the laugh of love, but of deceit. He paused. A servant heard it too, and told my father when dawn came. He did not rage. He did not strike. He merely sighed and said, "The heart that strays must walk its own road. The truth needs no chase." But my mother feared the stillness in him. She thought silence more dangerous than anger, so she went to her own mother, an old woman who lived in the shadow of the hills. A woman whispered to know the language of transformations. She returned with a small jar of smoke and a smaller jar of oil. That night, while my father slept, she opened the jar and let the smoke pour across his bed. He woke once, tried to speak, and his voice turned to the bleating of a calf. The traveler's eyes dimmed with memory. In the morning, she led him to the stables and told the servants he had gone on business. She gave orders to treat the calf well, for she felt a fondness for the creature. The demon said nothing. The merchant watched quietly. This man had a wife, the traveler continued, as clever as she was beautiful. He loved her deeply, but she did not return it. Her heart was full of schemes, not tenderness. When he was away at trade, she entertained another beneath his roof, thinking herself unseen. But walls have ways of hearing, and one night, as she whispered her false love, her husband's servant heard every word. The traveler's eyes drifted toward the gazelle, his hand absently stroking its head. When the husband returned, the servant told him all. He did not rage, nor raise his hand. He only watched his wife in silence, and from that silence she grew afraid. One morning, she went to her mother, who, as fate would have it, knew the art of magic. "Change my husband," she pleaded, "so he cannot shame me." The old woman smiled and gave her a vial of smoke. When poured upon his pillow, it would change the man into what her heart secretly believed him to be. The demon's brow furrowed. And what did she believe? The traveler's voice softened. She believed him to be nothing more than a beast of burden, a calf. He paused there, letting the word hang in the air like incense. One moment he was a man, weary from travel. The next, he was a calf standing beside his own bed, unable to speak, unable to plead. His wife laughed softly, her cruelty light as perfume. "Now," she said, "let the world see how dull my husband truly was." The merchant shifted, unease flickering in his chest. The story, though distant, felt too near, but the man's son, continued the traveler, suspected something strange. He followed the mother in secret and saw her pour a second vial of smoke upon another, a woman who had once been kind to him. That woman became a gazelle. He smiled faintly, running a thumb along the gazelle's ear. "This one, in fact, for I am that man's son." The demon tilted his head. "And what became of them?" "Patience," said the traveler. "Stories move at their own pace." He spoke then of how the young man, grieving and alone, went to a wise cook in the household, a woman old as dusk, with eyes like lamp oil. Together, they found a charm that undid the magic. Smoke met smoke, and the spell broke like glass. The calf became a man again, the gazelle a woman. And as for the wife who had dealt in cruelty, she became what she had accused others of being, a creature without compassion. Her form twisted into that of a wolf, and she fled to the desert, howling at the moon she would never again see as human. When the tale ended, the traveler fell silent. The gazelle nuzzled against his knee, its soft breath stirring the sand. The demon stood unmoving, his eyes dimmer now. At last he said, and so the grove became still again. The demon folded his arms. The merchant waited, and the man with the gazelle began to speak, slowly, gently, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of wind through leaves. "There was once a man," he said, "who trusted his heart too deeply, and a woman who knew the language of spells." And as he spoke, even the demon's burning eyes began to dim, their light flickering in time with the tale. The grove lay still beneath the noonday sun. Light fell through the branches in scattered patterns, gold and shadow moving slowly across the ground like water. The merchant sat where he had been all morning, back straight, hands folded loosely in his lap, a calmness on his face that did not quite reach his eyes. Before him stood the demon, vast and silent, his shape more suggestion than body, his presence filling the air the way heat fills a stone. But now there was another among them, the traveler. He was older than the merchant, his beard streaked with silver, his robe plain but clean. A small gazelle followed at his side, the rope between them more decoration than restraint. There was gentleness in the man's movements, each gesture careful, deliberate, as if he were afraid to startle the wind itself. He knelt beneath the fig tree, not too close, and bowed first to the demon, then to the merchant. "I thank you for your patience," he said softly, "and for allowing my words a place in this hour." The demon's eyes flickered faintly. "Speak then, traveler, but know this, no lie, no trick, and no spell will sway me. Only truth can move a heart such as mine." The man inclined his head. "I will tell only what has happened. Whether you find meaning in it is not my concern, only my hope." He settled cross-legged upon the ground, the gazelle curling beside him, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. He let the air still further. He let the leaves whisper. He let silence stretch, so that when he finally spoke, the sound of his voice seemed to ripple outward, like the first touch of rain after drought. "There was once," he began, "a merchant, much like this one here, honest, careful, and blessed with enough comfort to forget that the world can change without warning. The grove was very still. A breeze passed through the leaves, cool and faint. The merchant listened, his heart aching with quiet recognition. Even the demon seemed thoughtful. At last, the great being spoke, his voice no longer a growl but something nearer to an echo. "The tale you tell is full of pain, yet it carries balance. The wrong was met, and mercy still walked beside it. For this, I grant one portion of the merchant's life back to him." The traveler bowed his head. "May balance always be your companion." The demon turned his burning gaze to the merchant. "Two stories remain. If they are as true, your life may yet belong to the world again." The merchant, humbled, pressed his palms together. "I will listen," he said softly, "until mercy finishes its tale." And in the distance, over the low hum of the wind, the sound of another traveler's steps began to approach. The story faded into silence as naturally as the wind dies at dusk. No one moved for a time. The leaves above them hung motionless, light flickering softly through their edges, and the air felt heavy with thought. The merchant exhaled first. He had been holding his breath, though he had not noticed it. He looked to the traveler and then to the gazelle, bowing his head in quiet gratitude. Words would have broken the stillness, so he let his gesture speak for him. The demon stood tall at the edge of the grove. His eyes, once bright as embers, had cooled to a dull glow. The chains around his waist did not stir. He seemed to be listening not to the men before him, but to something deep within himself. An echo, a memory perhaps, of stories told long ago when the world was new. Finally, he said, "One portion of the debt is forgiven. The first tale has softened the anger in me, though it has not ended it." His voice carried no thunder now. It was quieter, more resonant, like the sound of a drum far away. The merchant's promise still stands, but the burden upon his life is now lessened by a third. Tellers of truth are rare, listeners rarer still. He turned his gaze to the merchant. "You have listened well. Continue, and you may yet walk free of shadow." The merchant bowed again, relief and awe mingling within him. "My thanks," he said, though the words were barely more than breath. The traveler rose, gathering the rope of his gazelle. The animal nuzzled his hand, then turned its calm eyes toward the merchant, as if offering its own silent blessing. "Stories," the traveler said softly, "are like wells. You drink from one, and the thirst for another follows. May the next tale pour kindly over you." He bowed once more and began to walk away, the gazelle stepping delicately beside him. Their shapes soon thinned against the light, until only the faint ringing of the little bell could be heard, fading into the horizon. When they were gone, the grove breathed again. The demon shifted, and with his movement came a sigh through the branches. The sunlight fell differently now, softer, almost tender. The merchant sat still, absorbing the moment, feeling as though the air itself had lifted a small weight from his chest. For the first time since he had returned to this place, he allowed himself to hope, not wildly, only the quiet hope that lives behind the ribs, like a small flame that refuses to die. He spoke into the stillness. "Thank you." The demon inclined his head slightly. "Do not thank me yet. The measure of mercy is not complete." He looked toward the distant road. "The wind brings another traveler." The merchant turned, following the direction of the demon's gaze. Across the dunes, a speck of movement shimmered through the heat. It grew slowly, first the outline of a man, then the glint of sunlight on metal. As the figure came nearer, the merchant could see that it was another wanderer, leading 2 black dogs on a braided leash. The animals moved gracefully, their dark coats shining, their eyes bright as polished glass. The man himself was tall, his robe the color of deep sand, his expression weary but kind. He approached the grove's shade and bowed first to the demon, then to the merchant. "I have walked a long way," he said, "and the wind carried strange tidings, a man who kept his word, a demon who waits, and a life weighed upon stories. May I rest a while, and may I tell one too?" The demon's gaze sharpened. "You would bargain for another soul?" The traveler smiled faintly. "No, only for the chance to remind the world what becomes of betrayal when patience walks beside it." The demon was silent for several breaths. Then he gestured with one slow hand. "Speak." The first tale softened my anger. "Perhaps yours will temper it further." The gazelle shifted, resting its head against the traveler's knee. "One evening," he said, "I found her whispering again to her jar. Another mist rose, pale blue this time, and drifted toward the maid who had been my friend. When it cleared, the woman was gone, and in her place stood this gazelle, eyes wide, trembling, silent. I wanted to cry out, but fear kept my tongue still. For many nights I hid in silence, until I could bear it no longer. Then I went to the old cookwise, wrinkled, the keeper of my father's keys. He smiled faintly. Old cooks always know the truth. She listened to my story without surprise. "Such magic," she said, "feeds on fear and vanity. To unmake it, you must show the heart its own reflection." She gave me a vial of her own, filled not with smoke, but with dust from the place where the first rain had fallen that year. She told me to pour it where the spell had begun. So at dawn I crept into my father's room and poured the dust upon his pillow. When the light touched it, the air shimmered, the calf's eyes brightened, and suddenly the voice that came from it was his own. The traveller's voice lowered further. He looked upon me, his son, and then toward the door of my mother's chamber. He said nothing. He only took the jar of smoke from her table and opened it before her. There was a single cry, short as the snap of a twig, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, a grey wolf stood in her place. It looked at him once, then turned and leapt through the window into the desert beyond. No one ever saw it again. He rested a hand on the gazelle's neck. My father and I lived in peace after that. This gazelle, who was once the kind maid, never took her human form again, but her eyes still hold the soul that once spoke kindly to me. I lead her with me now, not as servant, but as reminder that kindness, even when silenced, endures longer than cruelty. The third story was about to begin. The traveller adjusted his cloak, the 2 black dogs resting at his sides. The light of late afternoon spread through the grove like honey over stone. Even the demon seemed to soften beneath it, his outline blurring against the air. The merchant watched quietly, his hands folded, his heart caught between dread and peace. The man took a long breath, eyes half closed, as if listening to something far away before he spoke. "You have heard the beginning of my story," he said. "Now you will hear the middle of it, the place where the path turns, but does not yet end. When my brothers became what they are," he began, "I did not curse them. I did not shout to the heavens or demand their suffering. I simply lived beside them as I had lived before. For it seemed to me that perhaps punishment is not the point of justice. It is understanding." He looked at the dogs. They stirred, one laying its muzzle on his knee. I gave them shelter. I shared my food. And when I traveled again, I brought them with me. In the markets, people laughed to see me walking with 2 great hounds as silent as shadows. They whispered that I must be a sorcerer. But I spoke little. I was not a man of spells only, of memory. The years passed as they do in all stories. The seasons turned, and my fortune rose and fell like the tide. I found friends in strange lands and kindness among strangers. I learned that mercy is not always gentle. It is a long road one must walk again and again. He smiled faintly, lost in his own memory. One winter, while traveling through a mountain pass, a storm trapped us. The snow fell heavy, the wind a white howl around the rocks. I believed we would die there, my dogs and I, swallowed by cold. But at the edge of night, a faint light appeared, a lantern swaying between the drifts. A shepherd led us to his hut. He gave us warmth, food, and silence. And when the storm ended, I offered him gold. He refused. "Keep your coin," he said. "You'll need it when you forget what you already know." The merchant tilted his head. "What did he mean?" The traveler smiled. "That lesson has followed me all my life. Gold cannot buy memory, nor mend what pride has broken." The demon shifted, his gaze glinting faintly. "And the brothers? Did they ever speak again?" "Yes," said the traveler. "They spoke, though not in words." He reached down, touched the nearest dog's head. When they dreamed, they whimpered not like beasts, but like men remembering. They followed me into every danger, every market, every winter's road. They guarded me not from threat, but from loneliness. And when I sat beneath strange stars, I felt their eyes on me, eyes that understood what forgiveness costs. He leaned back slightly, the rhythm of his words slowing, fading almost into thought. One evening, after many years, I returned to the city of our birth. The people had forgotten us. The market had new faces, new traders, new voices. I stood before the ruins of our father's house crumbling, overgrown with vines. I remembered the day he gave us his blessing. "Be brothers still, though gold may divide you." I realized then that the blessing had never left us. We had simply forgotten how to carry it. I found my brothers there, living richly from my labor, boasting to the crowds that they had built their fortune with their own skill. I did not speak to them. I waited. I let the truth ripen in silence. One night the spirit returned, walking the narrow alleys unseen. "Have you found your peace?" she asked me. "Not yet," I said. "Their hearts are stone." She sighed, and the wind sighed with her. "Then let stone be their teacher." He paused, his gaze steady on the demon. When the sun rose, I found them changed. No longer men-only dogs, black as midnight, their eyes filled not with rage, but with the sorrow of understanding. They followed me from that day, not as beasts, but as companions. They remember everything, yet they harm no one. The dogs lifted their heads then, as if the story itself had brushed their dreams. One blinked, the other sighed, and both settled again at their master's feet. The traveler's voice softened to a near whisper. "Every day I walk with them, and every night I forgive them again. Such is the shape of mercy that it asks not to forget, only to walk beside what once was pain." He looked toward the merchant. "Tell me, good man, is it not true that even grief can be gentled by understanding?" The merchant nodded, his throat tight. "It is true." For a long moment, the grove said nothing more. Only the small stream spoke, its murmur threading between roots and stones. Finally, the demon stepped forward. His chains barely stirred, his voice quieter than before. "The truth in your story weighs heavier than gold. Betrayal met patience, and patience gave back mercy. For that, I forgive another portion of this man's life." The words seemed to shimmer in the air like a faint chime, and with them, the light through the leaves grew warmer, as if the grove itself approved. The merchant bowed deeply. "You have my gratitude, though my life is still not my own." "Two tales have spoken for you," said the demon. "One more may yet speak as you." He turned slightly, looking toward the long road that wound away into the dunes. "And the wind tells me that another comes, an older voice, slower even than mine." The traveler with the dogs rose, bowed, and stepped aside. The black dogs followed, their paws whispering through the sand. The merchant lifted his eyes toward the horizon. There, small against the reddening sky, another figure approached, bent slightly with age, leading a mule that carried no burden at all. The old man walked with a staff, each step measured, as though counting not the distance, but the moments left in a long life. And as he drew near, the sun slipped lower, staining the grove in amber light. The merchant adjusted his cloak and leaned back against the fig tree once more. The air felt lighter now, and the sound of the stream returned, a quiet murmur weaving through the grove. The man with the black dog sat down upon the sand. The animals lay beside him, their heads resting on their paws, their eyes half closed as though they had heard many stories before. He folded his hands and began, his voice calm and even. "There were once 3 brothers," he said, "born under the same moon, raised under the same roof, and divided at last by envy." The grove stilled again, the first line of a new story curling gently through the air like smoke. The voice of the second traveler flowed through the grove like cool water across stone. The 2 black dogs rested quietly beside him, their dark fur shining with threads of sunlight that slipped between the branches. The merchant leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening. Even the demon, that vast and ancient shape, had gone still again, his gaze fixed, his presence heavy yet subdued. "There were once 3 brothers," the traveler began, his voice unhurried. "We were the sons of a merchant, much like this man here. Our father dealt in caravans and ships, in goods that traveled far across deserts and seas. When he passed, he left each of us an equal share of his wealth and a single wish: be brothers still, though gold may divide you." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that remembers both love and loss. "For a time we kept that wish. We traded together, broke bread together, and shared our fortunes honestly. But gold has a strange whisper, and envy a patient root. One year, I took a ship across the waters to trade in foreign ports. The sea was calm, and fortune favored me. When I returned, my chests were filled with treasures, silk like running light, spices that perfumed the air, and gems that burned in the sun. My brothers came to greet me at the shore, and I saw in their eyes the first shadow of jealousy. Still, I thought it would pass." He drew his hand slowly across the sand, leaving a line that the breeze began to erase. The next day, we set out together on a journey inland to visit another market. We traveled for many days. On the 7th night, as we camped beside a spring, my brothers came to me while I slept. They bound my hands with cord, stole my packs, and left me to die beneath the stars. The merchant frowned softly, sorrow moving behind his eyes. The demon remained silent. "But the night has ears," the traveler said, his tone softer now. "Before the dawn could find me, a spirit of the wilderness appeared, one of the old kind, neither kind nor cruel, only watchful. She freed my hands and asked me what I would do with my hatred. 'I will find them,' I said, 'and seek my justice.' She nodded once. 'Then justice will find you as well,' she said, and she touched my eyes. When I woke again, I stood in a strange city, my packs restored before me, though I knew not how." He looked toward the dogs, his voice lowering further, and the light filtering through the fig leaves turned the air to liquid amber. The merchant sat very still. 2 tales had been told, 2 debts had softened, and for the first time he felt the ache of hope pressing gently against his chest. He breathed in the scent of figs, earth, and slow-moving water. He thought of his wife, of his children, of the small lamp that might even now be lit in their home. Perhaps, he wondered, they too were thinking of him. The demon stood motionless at the center of the grove. His shape shimmered faintly in the dying light. The fury that had first clung to him had thinned into something quieter. Not peace exactly, but reflection. He seemed to listen to something beneath the wind, a voice older than rage. 2 stories, he said at last, and the weight of anger lessens, though it is not gone. This is strange to me, merchant. I have devoured kingdoms for smaller grievances, yet words have stayed my hand. The merchant bowed his head. Words are all that men have, my lord. When they are true, they are stronger than any weapon. The demon studied him for a long while. Perhaps, he murmured, tell me, if I forgave you now, what would you do with the life returned? The merchant thought carefully. I would go home, he said, and live quietly. I would teach my sons to weigh their words before their gold, and I would tell my daughter that the world listens best when spoken to with kindness. A faint sound passed through the grove, something like the breath of amusement. The demon's mouth curved almost into a smile. You speak as though you have already lived that life. The merchant nodded. Perhaps this year has been enough to teach me how. The rustling of leaves drew their eyes toward the road. The second traveler, with his 2 black dogs, was already fading into the dunes, his outline dissolving into the rose-colored haze of sunset. The bell of the first traveler's gazelle had long since vanished beyond hearing. Only the old man and his mule remained, standing at the edge of the grove, bathed in the quiet gold of twilight. He moved with care, his steps deliberate. The mule followed without rope or command, as if it understood the path by heart. When he reached the shade, he bowed low to the demon, then turned to the merchant and smiled. "Peace be upon you, good sir. The wind told me of your promise and your peril. I have come not to witness death, but to honor truth. May I rest a while and speak what time has left me?" The demon inclined his head. "One tale remains before the measure is full. If your story carries the weight of the others, the scales may yet balance." The old man eased himself down onto the sand, rested his staff across his knees, and closed his eyes. He looked as though he might be sleeping, but when he began to speak, his voice was steady and low, the kind of voice that fills silence without disturbing it. He fell silent for a time. Only the stream spoke again, murmuring through reeds. Then he continued, his voice soft as the first sound of dawn. "I knelt between them, between these 2 who were once men, and I said, 'I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I cannot bear the weight of not forgiving.' A wind rose from nowhere and circled the ruins. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was alone. They were gone, but sometimes, when I walk under the night sky, I see 2 shadows pacing beside mine, silent and loyal. Perhaps they walk still, somewhere between mercy and memory." When he finished, the grove was very quiet. The merchant had tears in his eyes, though he did not weep. The demon's head bowed slightly, his eyes dim as cooled ash. At last the demon said, "You have shown that mercy outlives punishment. For this I will forgive another third of the merchant's life." He turned toward the merchant. "Now 2 portions have been lifted, 1 remains. The measure of a heart is in the stories it keeps. You are nearly free." The merchant bowed deeply. "I have learned more from their voices than I ever learned from gold." The traveler smiled faintly. "Then your heart is already lighter than your debt." He stood, gathered the leashes of his dogs, and bowed once to the demon, once to the merchant. The dogs rose beside him, and as they left the grove, the sand beneath their paws made no sound at all. The sun had begun to fall behind the western hills, painting the sky in colors that bled from copper to rose. The merchant sat alone again, the air cooling around him. He thought of promises, and of the strange ways kindness can return to a man who walks with patience. And then, through the fading light, came the soft tap of a staff on stone. An old man approached, leading a mule that carried nothing but a blanket and a water skin. His beard was white as salt, his face lined deeply, yet his eyes shone clear and young. The demon turned toward him. "And what tale do you bring, old one?" The elder smiled. "Only the one that time has left me." The grove had changed again. What had been bright with noon and gold was now bathed in the colors of evening. The shadows stretched long and thin across the sand. When I returned to the world of men, I found I could no longer speak harshly. The song had changed me. Whenever anger rose in me, I remembered that tear and that lily, and the sound of forgiveness hidden in the heart of sorrow. He looked at the demon. "That is my story. It is not about power or punishment, but about a song that turned even silence into mercy. Before I tell my story," he said, "I must tell you of the sound that began it. It was a song, not sung by any man or woman, but by something wild and sorrowful, a deer in the forest at dawn." The merchant felt the air shift around them. Even the demon leaned closer, the glow in his eyes softening. The old man continued, "This song carried through the trees, and whoever heard it felt his heart remember something he had forgotten. I followed it once, long ago. It led me far from my home, into a place where all paths end and begin again. There I found not a beast, but a lesson." He stopped, letting the words hang like dust in light. "But that," he said, "is the story I will give you, if you will grant me a moment more of listening." The demon's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Speak, elder. The sun still clings to the edge of the world. Before it falls, let your tale be told." The merchant leaned back against the fig tree. The air had cooled to velvet, the first star trembling faintly above the dunes. The old man's eyes glinted in the dimming light, and as he began to weave his tale, even the chains at the demon's waist grew still. Night had not yet fallen, but the sky had begun to soften. The sun leaned low above the dunes. a burning coin pressed to the edge of the world. The air was cooling. The scent of figs and dust mingled with the faint sweetness of evening. The grove waited in that tender hush between day and dark, the moment when even wind hesitates to speak. The old man sat with his mule beside him, its breath steady, a pale curl of mist in the fading light. He laid his staff across his knees and looked toward the merchant with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 evenings. "You have listened well," he said softly. "That is a kind of courage most men never learn." The merchant bowed his head. "I have learned that listening is a bridge between fear and peace." The demon regarded them both in silence. His form shimmered faintly, less solid now, as though he were a shadow remembering its shape. "If you have a tale to tell," he said to the old man, "let it be spoken before the stars are born." The old man smiled. "It will not be a tale of kings or treasure. It is only the story of a song and the one who followed it." He drew in a slow breath, and as he exhaled, the grove seemed to lean closer, as though the trees themselves bent to listen. "In my youth," he began, "I was a shepherd. My world was small. Only the hills, my flock, and the sky above. Each morning, I would walk until the sun was high, and each night, I would fall asleep beneath its memory. There was peace in such a life, though I did not yet know it. One dawn, as the light was barely breaking, I heard something strange echoing through the mist, a sound so beautiful that the birds stopped mid-flight. It was the cry of a deer, soft and sorrowful, a melody no human voice could carry. It wound through the trees like smoke, and when it touched my heart, I wept without knowing why." He paused. The demon listened, unblinking. The merchant watched, the world narrowing to the rhythm of the old man's words. "I left my flock behind," said the old man. "I followed the sound. It led me deeper into the forest than I had ever gone before. The trees grew close together, their roots curling like sleeping serpents. The air grew cool and heavy with the scent of moss. At last I came to a glade where a small stream sang against the stones, and there, standing in the water, was a deer. Its coat shone like silver beneath the dawn. Its eyes were not the eyes of an animal. They were ancient, filled with knowing. It looked at me and I at it, and neither of us moved. The old man's voice softened to almost a whisper. I raised my flute. It was a simple reed carved by my own hand. I played one note, then another, matching the sound it had made. The deer tilted its head, and then together, we wove a song that filled the glade with stillness. He smiled faintly, remembering. When it ended, the deer bowed its head once, and a single tear fell into the stream. Where it landed, a lily bloomed. I reached for it, but the deer turned and vanished into the trees. The song remained in my heart, and I knew then that some beauty is meant not to be held, but only to be carried quietly inside us. The merchant exhaled slowly, his chest tight with wonder. Even the demon seemed gentler, his eyes no longer burning but glowing softly like lanterns beneath the water. The old man placed a hand on the mule's neck and said, as the old man drew a breath and began again, his tone hushed and sure, "The song of that deer," he said, "did not end in the forest. It followed me home, as all true songs do. It found its way into my dreams, into the way I spoke, even into the stillness of my heart. When I breathed, I could almost hear it again, a thread of sound woven between my thoughts. For many years I tended my flock. I grew old among the hills. The world changed its face around me. Villages rose. Paths turned to roads. I gave him water, bread, and the cool of the shade. As he sat, he plucked a few strings of his harp, and in the sound, I heard it, the song of the deer. It was the same music, though shaped by another's hands. I asked him where he had learned it. He smiled and said, "From a man who once heard it in a dream." The old man's eyes glimmered with the memory. So the song had wandered the world, changing its voice but never its heart. It had passed from creature to man, from man to dream, and from dream back to life again. That is how truth travels quietly, patiently, unbroken. For a long moment no one moved. The last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the hills. The grove dimmed, bathed now in twilight blue. The demon lowered his head, the chains at his sides still as stone. "Your story is quiet, yet it carries truth. In it, I hear the echo of what I once was before wrath taught me its language." He lifted his gaze to the merchant. "This tale shall weigh for the last third of your life." The merchant's breath caught. "Then I am free?" "Not yet," said the demon. "Freedom must be spoken aloud. When the last tale ends, I will decide if mercy outweighs vengeance." And beneath the fig tree, the merchant waited for the demon's final judgment. while somewhere deep in the darkness, a nightbird began to sing the same melody the deer once played. The grove lay wrapped in twilight. Only the last faint colors of day lingered at the horizon, like the memory of a sunset after it has gone. The merchant sat perfectly still beneath the fig tree, and the demon stood across from him in silence, listening, for the old man's story had not yet finished. The mule grazed softly among the roots, its movements slow and rhythmic, his voice low and almost human. Your tale carries no vengeance, no justice, only the weight of gentle truth. It softens even the hardness within me. I have heard the song, Old One, and though it was meant for the world, it has reached me also. He turned his burning gaze toward the merchant. This story will decide. When the stars climb high and the air cools with the hour before midnight, I will speak the final measure. The old man bowed. He placed the flute upon the ground, a gift left where the light and shadow met, and rose slowly. His mule followed as he walked toward the edge of the grove, its hooves barely marking the sand. The merchant watched him until he was gone. The air felt different, now lighter, as though something vast had exhaled. He looked to the demon. The creature stood unmoving, the faintest glow still burning within its eyes. Then the merchant closed his eyes, and for the first time since the fig tree had cast its shadow upon him, he slept. And while he slept, the wind stirred the leaves above him into a gentle murmur, a sound that might have been only wind, or might have been the faintest echo of a flute, playing far away in the dark. When the merchant woke, the grove was bathed in silver. Moonlight spilled through the branches, turning every leaf into a quiet lantern. The air was cool now, touched with the faint scent of water and dust, and somewhere nearby a night bird sang 3 soft notes before falling silent again. The merchant sat up slowly, unsure for a moment where dream ended and waking began. The fire at the heart of the grove, once burning in the demon's eyes, was dimmer now, as though the creature's anger had cooled into thought. The chains that hung at his sides no longer rattled. They lay coiled, still and heavy, upon the ground. The demon's gaze followed the last traces of the old man's path until the desert swallowed it. Then he turned to the merchant. "You slept," he said quietly. "I did," the merchant answered, "and I dreamed." "Of what?" "Of a song," said the merchant, smiling faintly. "One I did not know I remembered." The demon studied him for a long time. The moonlight reflected softly off his skin, no longer dark stone, but something translucent, as if his form were thinning between one world and the next. "You have kept your word," the demon said at last. "You returned when you might have fled. You listened when fear might have closed your ears. And though death still stands at the gate, I find no anger left in me to open it." He paused. His voice, once thunder, was now only a low human note. "When first I came to you, my son was dead, and I sought to balance loss with loss. But these stories have shown me something I had forgotten, that grief is not lessened by more grief, only quieted by understanding." He reached into his cloak and drew out a small flute of reed. The instrument was simple, worn smooth with years of touch. He held it gently in both hands, and as he raised it to his lips, the grove seemed to grow even quieter, as though the night itself leaned close to listen. A single note drifted out soft, almost shy. It hung in the air for a long moment before fading. Another followed, then another, each one falling like dew onto the silence. The merchant felt his breath slow. The demon closed his eyes. The old man played not for them, but for the air, for the tree, for the memory of the deer that had once sung at dawn. The melody rose and fell like wind across distant grasslands. It spoke of gentleness, of longing, of forgiveness. It spoke of the briefness of all things beautiful, and the strange peace found in letting them go. When the song ended, the grove felt lighter, emptied, but not hollow. The old man lowered the flute. His eyes, when he looked at the demon, were full of quiet compassion. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "The song is not about sorrow or joy. It is about balance. It reminds us that to keep what we love, we must learn to let it pass through us without trying to hold it still. The deer taught me this, and in turn I have taught it to the world." The demon said nothing. The night breeze passed through the fig leaves, making a sound like 1,000 tiny sighs. At last the demon spoke, the small fountain murmuring to itself. He set down his pack and called out gently. His wife appeared in the doorway. For a moment she only stared, as though fearing the desert had sent her a ghost. Then she ran to him, and the sound of her sob carried through the house like a bell. The merchant lowered his head. "Then you forgive me?" "There was never truly fault," said the demon. "Only accident, and the blindness of 2 worlds colliding." He lifted one hand, and from his palm drifted a thin wisp of smoke-pale, trembling, rising toward the branches like breath released. "Take back your life, merchant. I have no claim to it now." The merchant bowed deeply, words caught in his throat. "Then you free me?" "I free us both," said the demon. The grove brightened as though dawn had come early. The chains at the demon's waist fell away, melting into the sand without a sound. The earth beneath them shivered, and a soft breeze wound through the fig leaves, lifting them one by one until they shimmered like coins in the air. The demon looked upward. For the first time, his face was calm. "Perhaps my son's spirit walks now where the stories go," he said. Perhaps he listened still. He turned to the merchant once more. "If ever men forget the weight of their promises, remind them of this day. Tell them that even the unseen listens, and that mercy is older than wrath." The merchant nodded. "I will carry it in every word I speak." The demon smiled, a small, tired smile, and for a moment, the merchant saw not a monster, but something vast and sorrowful learning how to rest. "Then live," the demon whispered. His form grew faint, fading into the moonlight until he was nothing but shadow, and then the shadow itself dissolved. The grove sighed. The air softened. Only the fig tree remained, its roots deep and its leaves trembling gently in the wind. The merchant rose slowly. His body felt lighter than it had in a year, his heart empty, in the way a cup is empty ready to be filled again. He looked at the place where the demon had stood and bowed once more, not in fear, but in respect. The wind brushed past him, and in its whisper, he thought he heard a voice. Not words, just the echo of the old man's melody, woven now into the rhythm of the world itself. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the merchant turned his face toward home. The sand was cool beneath his feet. His donkey stirred, patient as ever. Behind him, the grove shimmered in the rising light, its shadow stretching long and thin across the earth. And for the first time in many nights, the merchant smiled. The desert was quiet in the early light. The stars had dissolved into pale blue, and the wind moved softly through the dunes, as if it too were tired from a long night of listening. The merchant walked with steady steps. The sand was cool beneath his feet, the weight of his robe brushing lightly against his legs. Each footprint he left filled itself again, leaving no trace that he had passed. And yet the road home had never felt clearer. His donkey followed behind, slow and faithful, its bells chiming faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. The sky above stretched endless and soft, its color deepening from silver to the gentle warmth of dawn. He did not hurry. After a year of fear, haste had no meaning left. He stopped now and then to drink from his flask, or to touch the leaves of a desert shrub, remembering the stillness of the fig grove, the way the moonlight had made the demon's face seem almost human. He thought of the three travelers and their tales, how each had carried a kind of mercy folded inside sorrow. He thought of the old man's song, the sound of the flute in the dark, and the way even a demon had paused to listen, and he realized that the world itself was a listener, the earth beneath his feet, the air in his lungs, the wide sky above, all of it waiting quietly for stories worth keeping. When the spires of his city came into view, the sun was high enough to warm the stones. He paused on the hill above it and watched smoke rising from cook fires, heard the distant cries of the market, and felt his heart tremble between disbelief and relief. He was home. He walked through the gates unrecognized. A year had changed him. His beard had grown white at the edges. His eyes, once restless, were now still pools. He passed through familiar streets, as one might drift through a dream. At last he reached his own door. The courtyard lay just as he had left it, the date palms swaying softly, the scent of oranges in bloom. That evening, as the sun faded into gold, the merchant sat among his family. His sons knelt beside him. His daughter leaned against his arm. He spoke of the journey, of the demon and the three travelers, and of how words and compassion had turned death aside. He told them, "Keep your promises even when no one is watching. Listen more than you speak. And if you ever hear a story whispered by the wind, sit and let it finish. For the world itself may be speaking to you." When night came, he stepped outside alone. The air was warm. The moon was high. The trees whispered softly above him. And in their leaves he thought he heard again that distant melody, the one the old man had played, the one the deer had once sung at dawn. It rose and fell in the breeze, fading as he closed his eyes. He smiled. "I have kept my word," he said quietly, "and the world has kept me." Far away, the fig tree stood beneath the same moon, its branches heavy with fruit, its shadow long across the sand. If one listened very closely, one might hear faint music still, the sound of stories resting, the echo of mercy returning home, and somewhere between waking and dream, a demon slept at last, no longer burning, but at peace.